I don't hide my championing of capitalism, but in all that time, only one person has ever asked me, why capitalism? I believe there's many good reasons for why capitalism, and I want to offer here a collection of short essays that advance such arguments. The structure of this collection is to both provide an accumulative case for why capitalism, but also are kept self-contained so one can hop and jump to whatever topic most interests them. The topography of these reasons for why capitalism break down into roughly four regions: consequences, morality, meaningfulness, and utopia. If I were to summarize the upshot of all my arguments, it would be this. It's not that capitalism isn't good enough for us, but rather it is we who are not good enough for capitalism. Ultimately then, the only real reason people hate capitalism, I contend, is because they do not believe people can be entrusted with the freedom it provides. So before we begin, I should add that these essays are not research articles, and so are not as thorough or exhaustive as a proper analysis. I am only to provide a quick guide, or a sort of sampler of the arguments for why capitalism. Yet even still, I will likely still have written these in a rather dry, systematic and analytic sort of way. And while I certainly could produce an exhaustive case, exploring every objection and poking every nook and cranny and turning over every stone, I have already spent significant time just to do this much, and I would not wish to torture you with it. I shall attempt to provide a more playful and engaging experience as I guide you through the reasons for why capitalism. So for the remainder of this video, I'm going to address some preliminary topics. These topics are detailing and justifying a methodology, and also providing a landscape of the economic systems to which capitalism finds itself in. Methodology deals with how I'll investigate and advance arguments, while the outlining of a landscape of economic theories gives us a shared understanding of what an economic theory is, what it's for, and what other types exist. So we'll begin with methodology. So how do you form beliefs or theories? How do you recognize good ones from bad ones? And what are beliefs and theories even for? A methodology is a method or a process in which one forms beliefs or theories. The most well-known method to laypersons would be the scientific method, but there are other methods too, and which one we ought to deploy largely depends on the type of thing we're investigating. So before we can talk about the examination, let's take a moment to consider the very interesting, at least to me, the very interesting question about how we might identify a good methodology in the first place. It would seem easy to say that a good methodology is that which produces true beliefs, whilst a bad methodology produces false beliefs. But this would be overly simplistic and also misguided. First, this explanation is just kicks the can down the road to a more pressing question, which is what is truth and how do we recognize it? And second, producing true beliefs seems insufficient for a methodology to be a good one. Why? Well, consider this. If you had a magic 8 ball, like a novelty magic 8 ball, that produced beliefs that happened to be true, we'd still say that that's a worse methodology than, say, the scientific method that still makes errors. So it seems a good methodology isn't just a methodology that produces true beliefs, but also produces them in the right sorts of ways. There needs to be some sort of connective tissue between the beliefs produced and the truth. You might think that the right sort of way is just seeing the truth as if it were obvious. But again, two issues arise here. First, there still is no answer to what is truth and how do we recognize it. It also fails to resolve issues of disagreement. If both people just appeal to it's obvious when their views are contradictory, we have no way of navigating the disagreement. And third, the truth is obvious shtick can't provide us with guidance with complex questions or phenomena, like how does light interact with a black hole, what should the national budget be, and how should society be organized? How we navigate these types of questions and come to beliefs, let alone true beliefs about them, is exceptionally difficult. And even when we arrive at a conclusion, the truth of it is hardly obvious. So the primary methodology that I shall use throughout these essays is what is called conceptual analysis. So conceptual analysis is the examination of concepts and ideas, what these concepts and ideas are, what their content is, how accurate or useful they are, and what their connection is to other concepts. Conceptual analysis is incredibly important because concepts allow us to understand the world, allowing us to interpret empirical data, thoughts and ideas we have or others have, and they help us carve up the world so we can even cognize it. We perform conceptual analysis with thought experiments that are designed to produce or bring out intuitions. A pivotal part of conceptual analysis are these intuitions, and intuitions are roughly a sort of seeming or a kind of gut feeling about what the case might be. So, in an important sense, intuitions are sort of it's just obvious kind of thing, but they can be overwritten and they can be illusory. However, unlike just it's just obvious, intuitions can come in degrees and they can be rejected or mistaken. So accounting for intuitions is important, but we have two ways of doing so. A belief or theory can validate or vindicate an intuition by explaining why the intuition is correct, or a belief or a theory can revise an intuition by explaining how the intuition is mistaken by providing a compelling explanation for why we have it in the first place. So intuitions also differ from the it's just obvious shtick, because intuitions often stand in contradiction against each other within the same person, thus showing us personally that at least one of our intuitions must be mistaken. Thought experiments are designed to not only bring out one's intuitions, but also serve as counterexamples to theories. For example, one may have the belief that the only thing which matters is happiness, and further, the belief that the more happiness there is, the better off we are. So one might raise a counterexample, or a thought experiment, such as the sheriff and the innocent hobo, which is something like this. Suppose that there is a hobo who has been implicated in a murder, and the sheriff knows that the hobo is innocent, but the townsfolk are furious and angry, and they demand that the hobo be hung, otherwise they'll riot. So the sheriff is put in a predicament. Should he hang the innocent hobo in order to appease the mob to stop a riot? Intuitively, the answer is no, because there is something else that matters, or perhaps matters more than happiness, in this case, justice. So we can test our conceptual theories and beliefs via considering these thought experiments and test cases. But how do we know which intuitions to validate, which to revise, and which to ignore? Again, we need some way of identifying truth. A good methodology, I submit, is a methodology that provides us with good justification for holding a belief or a theory, and the more justified a belief is, the more likely it is to be true. So truth or justified beliefs or intuitions seem to have markers which can be graded upon spectrums, and the higher those markers are, or the higher their score on those different things, makes the belief more justified or the theory more justified. So you might ask, well, what are these markers of truth? I think this is a surprising number. For a belief or a theory to be justified or to be closer to the truth, we expect it to score highly on the following markers. So first, how the belief or the theory ... comports with the basic laws of both informal and formal logic, comports with our empirical understanding of the world insofar as such data is even relevant, has explanatory power, has predictive power, is elegant and simple, provides closure, is internally coherent, is commensurable with other beliefs within our epistemic network, and the theory and belief can be falsified. So let me give a quick overview of what each amounts to. So to comport with the basic laws of both formal and informal logic just means the belief or theory isn't an informal or formal fallacy or syllogistically invalid. So for example, my belief that hard work is all you need to succeed is likely a product of survivorship bias, which is an informal fallacy. To comport with empirical understanding and evidence means the belief or theory is informed by empirical evidence, insofar as such evidence is required. So for example, if you have the belief that a tower hit by a plane would not fall that way, the belief should be empirically informed, for example, by considering how many other times that event has occurred, and if, all else being equal, the other towers would fall the same way, or have fallen the same way. So explanatory power is a belief or theory's ability to provide plausible or compelling explanations or stories about as much of the relevant data as possible. So for example, a theory that states that the sole motivation of human behaviour is benevolence is highly unlikely to explain selfish or cruel behaviour. Predictive power is a belief/theory's ability to accurately forecast relevant outcomes. For example, a theory that states being aggressive towards women will attract a mate is unlikely to correctly predict future results. And these are reasons for why we would not hold these beliefs. For a belief or theory to be elegant and simple, that belief must eliminate as much unnecessary detail or parts as possible. So the best way of kind of understanding this idea, or these markers, is by considering elegant and simple solutions. So Steve Jobs' design principles are excellent examples of elegance and simplicity. The iPod was an incredibly elegant and simple solution to the problem of how can we carry all of our music with us. I think the opposite of like elegant and simple is Baroque and convoluted. So Baroque and convoluted beliefs or theories with too many moving parts, or parts that are difficult to understand or comprehend, or take too long to kind of get to the point, is the opposite of what we want in a belief or a theory. The other thing a belief should do is provide closure, which means it must provide an effective end to the investigation, but also not raise more problems than it solves, and if possible to not bring up any problems. So conspiracy theories often fail the closure test because they generate significantly more questions than they intended to answer. Coherence and commensurability are two sides of the same coin. The first speaks to the belief's internal coherence, while the second speaks to the belief's compatibility or coherence with the other beliefs that one has. So for example, a belief like the government is untrustworthy because they've released reports in the past about crimes that they've done is prima facie incoherent because the belief relies upon the government report being earnest about their past crimes. In essence, you have to trust their self-reporting, which is the very thing the claim says you cannot do. So it's internally incoherent. One might also believe, for example, that there's no moral facts, but on the other side, also believe that certain nations are doing certain acts such as genocide, and these genocidal acts are utterly and indisputably morally reprehensible. And that would be incommensurate with those two beliefs are incommensurate. So the falsifiability refers to whether the belief or theory can be shown, at least in theory, to be false or in error. So it can be tested. So conspiracy theories are unfalsifiable. So, for example, the reason conspiracy theories are considered quite poor by more learned folk is because they're unfalsifiable. Because there is no counter evidence that can ever be provided to show that they are wrong. So counter evidence is always absorbed by a conspiracy theory ad hoc, by arguing that the counter evidence actually just is further evidence of the conspiracy theory's veracity. So for example, January 6th and the QAnon conspiracy theory. There was a theory that had, according to some people, a high level of explanatory power, but it made predictions about the future. And one of those predictions was that Trump would unleash a special team to arrest all the deep state actors who'd been conspiring against him and the American people. However, this prediction did not come to pass. So you would think that it'd be falsifiable. But this counter evidence is simply explained away ad hoc as further evidence for the truth of QAnon. So in short, my methodology is this. For conceptual and evaluative problems, such as why capitalism, we must rely on conceptual analysis as our tool for investigation. We want our answers, beliefs, and theories to be justified because justification seems to track truth. Justification and truth seem to have markers, and the higher a belief or a theory scores on those markers, the more justified and the more likely they are to be true. We want our theories and beliefs to have a higher degree of explanatory power, predictive power, we want them to be elegant, we want them to have simplicity, we want them to provide closure, to be coherent, to be commensurate, and to be falsifiable. We judge whether a theory or belief meets those elements by carefully considering the conceptual connections between concepts and how these accord with the rules of informal and formal logic, whilst ensuring they are empirically informed and updated where necessary. So, before we investigate capitalism at all, we need not only a shared understanding of it, but also of its alternatives. The best way we can do this is by sketching out a topography of economic systems. We can begin by outlining what questions economic theories are even attempting to answer. And roughly, these questions seem to be as follows. A, what stuff should be produced? B, how much stuff should be produced? C, how should stuff be produced? D, who should produce the stuff? And E, who should stuff even be produced for? So the above questions do not demand binary answers, but rather answers of degrees. And so economic systems are not of different in kind, but they're indifferent of degrees. So much how something can be more or less blue, an economic system can be more or less capitalist. Our topography of economic systems in a shared space is thus defined by economic freedoms along borders which correspond to the above questions. So what's on the screen now is a useful visual graphic of that landscape with, at its most extreme corners, the three economic systems that currently exist: feudalism, socialism, and capitalism. So feudalism is an economic system of where who gets what and who does what is wholly determined by class. The elites get most of the stuff and can only do certain types of jobs, like being a lawyer, for example, whilst the masses get very little and can only do certain types of jobs, for example, being a farmer and a cobbler. The elites get to tell what the lower classes what to do and how much to do and when to do it, and the lower classes don't get much of a say in anything. In fact, they get no say at all. Socialism is an economic system in which the means of production are collectively owned, either by being held in common, that is, everyone owns it, or by the state, or by those working directly with the means of production. How the stuff is produced, distributed, and who produces what depends upon the collective decision of the community, or the state, or the workers, depending on what type of socialism you're talking about. The types of work people can do, and the types of things they can produce, and how much they can produce of it, depends entirely upon what the community or the state decides or allocates to them. So capitalism is the economic system in which the means of production are privately owned by private citizens, and the sort of stuff made is decided by those who own that private production, and how much stuff is produced or distributed is entirely decided by voluntary exchanges made by those who have a legitimate claim on the things that they exchange. The types of things you can do in a capitalist society are vast, depending entirely upon other people's decisions to facilitate those things. What is of vital importance is that capitalism is an economic system in which voluntary exchanges are fundamental. This means stuff must be created, traded, bought, and sold in absence of coercion, force, blackmail, deceit, manipulation, etc., and those involved in a potential exchange must be properly informed. So if Jane threatens to beat John into making a trade, or tricks him, or lies to him, or deceives him, or manipulates him in some way, or misinforms him, or leaves out important information about the trade which would otherwise change his mind about it, then those exchanges under those conditions are not voluntary. To facilitate such voluntary exchanges, capitalism has the following traits which distinguish it sharply from feudalism and socialism. 1. Capitalism has strong legal protections for private property. 2. In capitalism, there is a wide dispersion of private property across the population. 3. Capitalism has extensive international trade. 4. Consumer sovereignty reigns in capitalism. 5. Capitalism has a diversity of employment contracts. So capitalism is really all about market freedoms. In a capitalist economy, people have stuff that is theirs, private property is dispersed over a population, and they are free to trade it, if they so choose to, with whomever agrees to, regardless of where or who they are. What stuff gets made, by who, and how is decided by those willing to make it, diversity of employment contracts, and how much stuff is made is largely dictated by the demand for it, consumer sovereignty. So capitalism seems to provide the following answers to our questions. What stuff should be produced? Whatever stuff people want to produce. How much stuff should be produced? However much stuff people want to produce. How should stuff be produced? In whatever way they decide. What should stuff be produced for? Whoever the producer decides. Who should produce the stuff? Whoever wants to produce it.